So while we bring this up, I'd just like to thank the GFN for being back and ISoNTech. You know, this is a really exciting meeting to come to every year, learn about what's going on, see some old colleagues. So really happy to be here. And we didn't really have coordination before the speakers, but some themes have really come up again and again. So it's nice to see that we're kind of all on the same wavelength. So first of all, always start with the broad view of tobacco harm reduction, right? And we've definitely heard about the continuum of risk. Anyway, continuum of risk means that across tobacco harm reduction, or across tobacco products, some are more risky, going all the way down to complete abstinence, which has no risk. But it's not really a continuum in the traditional sense. It is much more of a risk cliff. You have your combustible products, and then you have everything else down below. So today what I really like to talk about is one class of non-combustible products. In there we have electronic cigarettes, we have heat not burn, we have smokeless tobacco, we have nicotine pouches. And we can discuss which one of those is sort of the less risky, the most risky. But the most important thing is that they're pose significantly less risk than a combusted product. So let's talk about oral nicotine products, right? So tobacco nicotine products, which they're not burned, they're placed in the oral cavity. Nicotine is absorbed through the buccal membrane, right? And so there's been a lot of work on these recently. I come from, traditionally, I worked at the FDA Center for Tobacco Products before. And so what they did is a large review of the smokeless tobacco literature. And what they determined was that the overall epidemiological evidence supports that cigarette smokers who completely switch to smokeless tobacco products are likely to substantially lower their risk of cardiovascular disease, lung cancer, respiratory disease compared to continued smoking. So that's great. Problem there is that this is a very sort of limited view of the oral nicotine and tobacco product world, right? And in reality, people have been using tobacco orally for thousands of years, right? And over the last hundreds of years, it's made it across the globe to where we have this huge variety of products that are being used everywhere. Different formats, ingredients are quite different, and the prevalence across the world really varies as well. So this is a quick map just to put up, but you can see that, used quite broadly across the world. In the US, the rates are about 5%, give or take. Sweden, a bit higher. In the Nordics, we're talking closer to 20%. But in Southeast Asia, that's really where the largest number of oral tobacco product users are by far, with prevalence rates, over 50% among males. Apologies to Australia, you fell off my map for some reason, but the prevalence is below 1%. You have not been erased. But so, these products sort of evolved, right? As products went across the globe, they sort of went to consumer tastes. They added sort of local ingredients, they added local processes, and that's how you got this huge array of different products. But there's a lot of differences between these products which really matter when we think about public health and tobacco harm reduction. So we have about 350 million users, right? Most of them in Southeast Asia. But let's look at one thing within these comments. NNN, which is a tobacco-specific nitrosamine. This compound is associated with risk of cancer. And you can see here, this is a log scale, by the way, that I really want the pointer. Nope. Oh, no. We're back. Aha, okay, there we go. So this is a log scale, and this is just showing the NNN content as a representative to kind of show the differences in the products. But you can see that a product like tumbak, which is used in Africa, has orders of magnitude higher levels of NNN than, say, Swedish snus here, which is very low. So the way that these products have evolved naturally over time has resulted in them having very different constituent levels and ingredients. But what does that mean? That means that over time, these natural evolution of these products has resulted in products which have very different risks. So what I'm showing here is the oral cancer risk by the different oral products. And you can see that products like this, Shama and Gutka, Tumbak, they're all quite elevated. Again, we're on a log scale here, so we're talking about orders of magnitude different risk of oral cancer. But of course, we're going to look at Swedish snus right here, right? And so right here, the odds ratio is close to 1. If the odds ratio is close to 1, that means that there is no excess risk as compared to non-users of the product. I just want to touch on this for a bit. So this product, Swedish snus, has been used in Sweden for quite some time. They do have pretty much equivalent use rates of nicotine products there as the rest of the EU, but there's some big differences because of their adoption of Swedish snus. So male smoking prevalence in Sweden is much lower than the rest of the EU. And also male deaths attributable to tobacco in Sweden is much lower than the rest of the EU. So it was on sort of the strength of this constituent data and the epidemiological data that has come from Sweden over the last several decades that General Snus was granted the first modified risk tobacco product order from the FDA. So basically this order said, you can tell consumers that using General Snus instead of cigarettes puts you at lower risk of cancers and respiratory diseases because we've evaluated the evidence and that is true. So this is really great. So, but where does the innovation come in? So the innovation that came in General Snus is that this product does have low levels of constituents, but there's also something called the ISoNTech standard, which was a standard that was developed to ensure that constituent levels within Swedish snus products remain below certain levels. Okay, so we have a good product here. But so the idea is, can we innovate even further? So we know that General Snus, switching from combusted cigarettes to General Snus, reduces your risk of a multitude of diseases. What can we do more? And what we could do more is develop nicotine pouches, right? So we've talked about nicotine pouches a bit already today, so I won't spend too much time on it. They're very, very simple. Nicotine inside a plant-based fiber pouch, stabilizers, filler, all of that. So these products are a result of innovation. And these products also have hugely reduced levels of constituents. Here I'm looking at total tobacco-specific nitrosamines, and you can see that Swedish snus, which had the very low odds risk of oral cancer, has about 80% less of this than traditional moist snuff you'd find in the United States. When we measure this in nicotine pouches, we don't measure it very well because the levels are so low that they're below the limit of quantification, right? And it's very hard to compare between a combusted cigarette and a nicotine pouch because we're talking about different routes of exposure. But the best analysis we can do is that there's about 99% less harmful and potentially harmful constituents within a nicotine pouch you'd get from a nicotine pouch as compared to a combusted cigarette. So, that's great, right? So we have a product. The risk of this product has been reduced. You could see the evolution had a lot of products with relatively high risks. We have a low constituent product. So it's great because everyone in the United States has now switched from combusted smoking to nicotine pouches. That is not what happened, and that's because transitions depend on a lot more than risk, right? So I find this four-square kind of really nice way to look at this. Toxicity is going up on this side, and then acceptance by smokers on the bottom. Combusted cigarette, very much accepted by smokers, but also the most toxic product, right? But then we think of something like NRT, nicotine replacement therapy. Very low toxicity, but also doesn't have a huge adoption, even though it's been around for decades by smokers. We could have a high toxicity, low acceptance products, but I'm not exactly sure what the point of that product would be. But then we could talk about all of these non-combustible smoke-free products, right? We can talk about heat-not-burn, e-cigarettes, and nicotine pouches. So where is the next innovation going to lie for nicotine pouches? So we've already got the risks down as low as we can. So what we really need to do is think about smoker acceptance and what we can do there. So let's talk about smoker acceptance for a second. So we did a study among our database of users, kind of asking them, what products did you use before you started using nicotine pouches? And real quick, there was about 1,300 people in this study. 382 of them were smokers who smoked some days or every day. And what we found is that, again, this is a convenient sample. These people really like the product. About 50% of them stopped smoking completely. About another 25% reduced their smoking by more than 50%. But it didn't quite work for everyone, right? And so what we really want to know is what can we innovate in this product to get more people to switch over from their combusted cigarette to their nicotine pouch. So what I'm presenting here is some data from researchers at Ohio State. What they did is they took smokers who did not use any oral nicotine products, and they gave them different nicotine pouches to try, and just to sort of gauge, how successful they might be with. So they're basically naive users to the nicotine pouch. And what we have here is sort of a scale of craving. They're asked after using the product, how much do you want to smoke right now? So let's just look at this gray line here, right? This is when they're using their usual brand cigarette. And their craving for a cigarette, of course, goes down very, very fast. But when we look at what we get when we're using a nicotine pouch, this is also on an expanded scale. So, craving is reduced in 5 minutes, but, for a nicotine pouch, it takes a lot longer to get there. And it also doesn't go down quite as much. And I think, we've already talked about this a little bit. From this same study, what they did is they measured PK study of the nicotine of these users, right? And you can see smoker shoots straight up and very high. Pouches, much slower, much lower peak than you get with the cigarette. Now, we have to keep in mind that these were naive users. They're kind of new to using a pouch, so that may have had something to do with it. But what we discussed before in the first talk was that it could be the nicotine level is not enough to be compelling to a smoker. It could be that the speed of the nicotine delivery is not compelling enough to a smoker. And so when we're talking about innovation, we're talking about how can we get those PK curves a little bit closer to each other so that people would have a better chance of moving over. In the US, traditional smokeless tobacco is quite popular. When you give nicotine pouches to a smokeless tobacco user, they get it. It's pretty easy, right? They're one oral tobacco product for another oral tobacco product. But that's a little trickier when it comes to the smoker. So if we look at another study, this is out of Oklahoma and UCLA. So they did the same thing. They took smokers who were a bit naive to nicotine pouches. They gave them several different, and they had a composite score of, did you like this product? Did you not like this product? Would you buy this product again? And one thing that definitely stood out is that there was a significant effect of flavor. If you gave them, they tried all 4 of these flavors, and the flavored products were significantly more likely to want to use them again than an unflavored product. So, with PK, it's great. We can innovate. We can look at the PK curve. We can figure out, exactly how to get closer for a combusted user. But then we have sort of these qualitative things, right? The flavor, which you talked about today a lot, the smell. But then in the pouch itself, right? The moisture of the pouch, how comfortable it is in the mouthfeel, even, the softness of the paper that's in the pouch. So there's a lot of places where we can really innovate here in order to bring, make these more smoker acceptable. We're doing a great job on the risk, but that's where we need to be innovating. So in conclusion, these products, oral tobacco products, are all over the world. We can't just think of them as smokeless Swedish snus and nicotine pouches. They exist everywhere, and the data and what we know about those products is really informative to drive our innovation forward in the future. Swedish experience gives us a great idea, the epidemiological data there, of what success could look like after the innovation and evolution of nicotine pouches. I already talked about that. So remember I said everyone didn't switch over. In fact, despite all the noise that you hear about nicotine pouches and the discussion about nicotine pouches, it's still only about 4% of the nicotine market in the United States. So there's a long runway for these products to really start taking more and more smokers away from their combusted products to a much less risky product. Innovation is definitely going to be important as far as nicotine delivery, as far as pouch size, mouthfeel. And the last place where I think we really need to be thinking about innovation is a bit, is education. We know that people misunderstand nicotine, misunderstand the continuum of risk, misunderstand the relative risk between products. And we also know that when people have a better understanding of the relative risk of tobacco products and nicotine, they're more likely to switch to a smoke-free product. So, really being innovative in the way that we discuss this with policymakers, with other scientists, and ultimately with consumers, I think could make a huge difference. Thank you much.